On a bitter winter night in the remote wilderness of Alaska's Kenai Peninsula, Marcus Thorne discovered that fate had an unexpected way of testing human compassion. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. When he opened his cabin door that evening, he didn't find the usual moose tracks or wolf prints in the snow. Instead, he found himself staring into the eyes of a massive grizzly bear, its fur encrusted with ice, its breath coming in ragged gasps. What would you do if one of nature's most fearsome predators appeared at your doorstep, not as a threat, but as a plea for help? Would you trust your instincts and slam the door, or would you risk everything to help a creature that could easily end your life? This story isn't just about an unlikely encounter between man and beast. It's about the remarkable bonds that form when we dare to show kindness in the face of fear, and how sometimes saving another life can lead to saving yourself. The wind howled through the towering spruce trees surrounding Marcus's remote cabin, their branches creaking under the weight of fresh snow. The temperature had plummeted to 30 below zero, turning the air into crystalline daggers that bit at any exposed skin. Inside, Marcus sat at his worn oak desk, the gentle click of his keyboard providing a steady rhythm as he worked on his latest wildlife research paper. The soft glow of his laptop screen illuminated the countless photographs adorning his walls. Stunning captures of the Alaskan wilderness that had become both his profession and his escape. The cabin itself was a testament to his dedication to solitude. Built by his own hands 5 years ago, after the accident that had torn his world apart, it stood as a fortress against both the elements and the memories he'd tried to leave behind in Seattle. The main room housed his research station, complete with sophisticated tracking equipment and weather monitoring systems. Maps of local wildlife patterns covered one wall, while his prized camera collection rested on custom-built shelves along another. A sudden gust rattled the windows, drawing Marcus's attention away from his work. He glanced at the digital thermometer. Mounted near his desk, the temperature was still dropping. Even for January in Alaska, this cold snap was exceptional. He'd spent enough time studying the local wildlife to know that these conditions could be lethal, even for the hardiest of creatures. The familiar crackle of his radio scanner cut through the silence. All units be advised. Extreme weather warning in effect for the Kenai Peninsula region. Multiple reports of displaced wildlife moving into residential areas. Caution advised. Marcus made a note in his research log. Unusual animal behavior during severe weather events was precisely the kind of data he needed for his current study. As a wildlife biologist specializing in large predator behavior, Marcus had chosen this location specifically for its proximity to one of Alaska's most diverse bear populations. His research focused on adaptation patterns in changing climates, though lately his work had taken on a more personal dimension. Understanding these magnificent creatures had become more than just a professional pursuit. It had become his way of making sense of a world that had stopped making sense years ago. The memory of that rainy Seattle night still haunted him. The screech of tires, the crash of metal, the devastating phone call that followed. His wife, Sarah, a fellow wildlife researcher, had been returning from a late-night emergency at their wildlife rehabilitation center when a drunk driver changed everything. The irony wasn't lost on him. She had died trying to save an injured eagle, her final act one of compassion for the creatures she had dedicated her life to protecting. A sharp crack from outside pulled Marcus from his thoughts. He rose from his desk, grabbing his heavy-duty flashlight from its charging station. Years of field experience had taught him to investigate any unusual sounds. They could be signs of animals in distress or indicators of changing weather patterns. Both were crucial to his research. The porch thermometer now read 35 below zero. Marcus pulled on his insulated parka, the familiar weight of the fur-lined hood settling on his shoulders. He'd learned early on that in Alaska, proper gear wasn't just about comfort. It was about survival. The heavy boots he laced up had seen him through countless research expeditions, their steel toes protecting him from more than just the cold. As he reached for the door handle, another sound stopped him short. This wasn't the crack of ice or the moan of wind-stressed trees. This was something else entirely. A deep, rumbling sound that seemed to vibrate through the cabin's wooden walls. Marcus's hand instinctively moved to the bear spray canister he kept by the door. In 15 years of wildlife research, he'd learned to trust his instincts, and right now, every one of them was on high alert. The sound came again, closer this time, followed by a heavy thud against the cabin's outer wall. Marcus's mind raced through possibilities. Perhaps a moose seeking shelter, though they rarely came this close to human structures. Or maybe a wolf, though the sound was too deep, too powerful for even the largest wolf he'd encountered. With practiced caution, Marcus flicked on his exterior floodlights, illuminating the snow-covered clearing around his cabin. The sight that greeted him through the window made him catch his breath. There, not 10 feet from his door, stood a massive grizzly bear. But this wasn't the confident, powerful predator he was used to observing through his camera lens. This bear was different. Frost had formed thick crusts in its usually luxuriant fur, creating an armor of ice that spoke of hours exposed to the brutal cold. Its movements were sluggish, uncoordinated, signs that set off immediate alarm bells in Marcus's experienced mind. The bear's head hung low, steam rising from its nostrils in ragged bursts. Most concerning was its behavior. Bears should be deep in hibernation this time of year, not wandering through a deadly storm. Marcus stood frozen, his mind warring between scientific observation and basic survival instinct. Everything he knew about bear behavior, every safety protocol he'd ever written about human-wildlife interaction, told him to stay inside, to let nature take its course. But something else, something that spoke to the part of him that had chosen this life, that had driven him to understand these creatures, made him hesitate. The bear's eyes met his through the window, and in that moment, Marcus saw something that shook him to his core. There was intelligence there, yes. Grizzlies were among the most intelligent predators he'd studied, but there was something more. Pain. Desperation, and something that looked remarkably like hope. Before he could second-guess himself, Marcus found his hand moving to the door handle. The wind howled through the gap as he opened it just enough to get a better look at his unexpected visitor. The bear remained still, save for the labored rise and fall of its chest. Up close, Marcus could see the true extent of its condition. This wasn't just a bear seeking shelter. This was a creature at the end of its strength. "Easy there, big one," Marcus heard himself say, his voice barely audible above the wind. The bear's ears twitched at the sound, but it made no aggressive move. Instead, it seemed to sway slightly, its massive frame unsteady on its feet. Marcus's researcher's eye caught more details, the way it favored its right side, the unusual pattern of ice formation in its fur, suggesting it had been lying in snow for an extended period. In that moment, Marcus thought of Sarah. How many times had she ignored conventional wisdom to help an animal in need? How many times had her instincts proven right, even when science suggested otherwise? The memory of her voice seemed to float on the bitter wind, Sometimes compassion has to outweigh caution, Marcus. Sometimes you have to trust that kindness is the right choice, even when it seems crazy. The bear took a shaky step forward, then another. Marcus held his ground, though every nerve in his body screamed at him to retreat. He was acutely aware of the power contained in that massive frame. Even in its weakened state, the bear could kill him with a single swipe of its paw, but as it moved closer, its movements remained slow, almost deliberate, as if it was being careful not to appear threatening. "You're not acting like yourself, are you?" Marcus muttered, his researchers' mind already cataloguing the unusual behavior. Bears typically avoided human structures, especially during winter. Their encounters with humans were usually either defensive or food-motivated. This was neither. This bear was exhibiting behavior he'd never seen in his years of research. The wind picked up again, driving needles of ice through the air. The bear shuddered visibly, its fur crackling with accumulated ice. Marcus made a decision that would either prove to be the wisest or last choice of his life. He opened the door wider and stepped back, creating a path into the warmth of his cabin. "I must be out of my mind," he whispered, keeping his movements slow and deliberate. "But I guess we're about to find out if I'm right about you." The bear stood at the threshold, steam rising from its fur as the warm air from the cabin met the frozen night. For a long moment, nothing moved except the swirling snow between them. Then, with a grace that belied its size, the bear stepped. Inside, its claws clicked softly against the wooden floor as it moved past Marcus, who stood completely still, barely breathing. The contrast between the bear's massive frame and his carefully organized research station would have been comical under different circumstances. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Now it just added to the surreal nature of the moment. Marcus closed the door against the howling wind, sealing himself in with one of nature's most powerful predators. The bear had stopped in the middle of the room, its head lowered, sides heaving with each breath. Up close, in the warm light of his cabin, Marcus could see that its condition was even worse than he'd initially thought. This wasn't just exhaustion from the cold. Something else was wrong. "Let's get a better look at you," he said softly, maintaining a calm he didn't entirely feel. Years of field research had taught him that voice tone was crucial when dealing with wildlife. Animals might not understand words, but they understood intention, emotion, threat. The bear's eyes followed him as he moved slowly toward his research station, where he kept his wildlife first aid kit. It was meant for smaller animals, injured eagles, foxes, the occasional wolf pup. But the basic principles would be the same. The bear made no move to stop him, which only reinforced his sense that something was seriously wrong. A healthy bear, even an exhausted one, would never be this passive. As Marcus gathered his supplies, his mind raced through possible scenarios. The bear's behavior suggested it might be injured, sick, or both. Its presence outside of hibernation was concerning enough, but its willingness to enter a human structure was unprecedented in his experience. He'd need to document everything. Assuming he survived this encounter, it would make an incredible research paper. The thought almost made him laugh. Here he was, potentially minutes from death, and his scientist's brain was still thinking about documentation. Sarah would have appreciated the irony. She had always teased him about his ability to maintain academic detachment in the most extreme situations. The bear swayed slightly, drawing his attention back to the immediate situation. It was watching him with those intelligent eyes, waiting. Marcus took a deep breath and did something that went against every safety protocol he'd ever written. He moved closer to the bear, medical supplies in hand. "All right," he said, keeping his voice steady. "Let's see what brought you to my door on a night like this." As he approached, the bear remained still, its only movement the steady rise and fall of its chest. Marcus had treated enough injured wildlife to recognize pain when he saw it, and this bear was in pain. In the warm light of his cabin, away from the howling storm, Marcus began to feel a strange sense of calm. Perhaps it was the familiar routine of examining an injured animal, or perhaps it was something deeper, a recognition that this moment, as dangerous as it was exactly where he needed to be. The storm raged on outside, but inside his cabin time seemed to slow down. Marcus Thorne, the wildlife biologist who had retreated from the world after losing everything, found himself facing a choice that would challenge everything he thought. He knew about wildlife, about survival, and about healing, and as the night deepened, he would discover that sometimes the most profound connections form in the most unlikely moments, even when they come wrapped in fur and claws. The soft glow of Marcus's desk lamp cast long shadows across the cabin floor as he carefully assessed his unusual patient. Years of field research had taught him to look for subtle signs, changes in breathing, muscle tension, pupil dilation, anything that might indicate aggression or distress. But the bear remained oddly still, its massive frame seeming to shrink under the warm light. Moving with deliberate slowness, Marcus began a visual examination. The bear's fur, usually thick and healthy in winter, was matted with ice and showed patches where it had been torn away. Deep gouges marked its right flank, partially healed but angry-looking. These weren't the typical wounds from territorial fights. The pattern was wrong. They looked more like... "Did you get caught in something?" Marcus murmured, noting how the wounds formed parallel lines. "Trap damage, possibly." Though trapping was illegal in this part of the preserve, the thought made his jaw clench. Despite regulations and enforcement efforts, illegal trapping remained a persistent problem in the area. The bear's breathing had steadied somewhat, though Marcus could still detect a slight wheeze that concerned him. He'd treated enough injured wildlife to recognize signs of respiratory distress. The combination of wounds, exposure, and exhaustion could easily be fatal, even for a creature as robust as a grizzly. His cabin, designed for research and solitude, had gradually evolved into something of a wildlife rehabilitation center over the years. Though he'd never attempted to treat anything nearly this large or dangerous, the basic principles remained the same. The first priority was warming the animal and assessing its injuries. Marcus retrieved several thick wool blankets from his emergency supply closet. The bear tracked his movements, but made no aggressive gestures. If anything, it seemed to sink further into itself, as though conserving what little energy it had left. He approached from the side, blankets held out where the bear could see them. "Easy now," he said softly, extending one of the blankets. The bear's nose twitched, investigating the unfamiliar scent. Slowly, carefully, Marcus draped the blanket over the bear's shoulders. The animal flinched slightly at the contact but didn't pull away. Instead, it seemed to lean into the warmth, a shudder running through its massive frame. Encouraged by this response, Marcus spread the remaining blankets, creating a nest of warmth around the injured creature. As he worked, his mind catalogued every detail with scientific precision. The bear's size and features suggested it was female, probably 6 or 7 years old. Her weight was below normal for this time of year. She should have been deep in hibernation. Her body sustained by carefully accumulated fat reserves. Something had disrupted her natural cycle, forcing her to abandon her den. The thought troubled him. Bears didn't leave hibernation without serious cause, especially not in conditions this severe. Whatever had driven her out had to be significant. The wind outside seemed to intensify, rattling the cabin's windows. Marcus glanced at his weather station's readout. The temperature had dropped another 5 degrees, and the barometer suggested the storm was far from over. He added another log to the wood stove, watching as sparks danced up the chimney. As the cabin grew warmer, the ice in the bear's fur began to melt, creating small puddles on his floor. The bear's eyes had grown heavy, though she fought to keep them open. Marcus recognized the behavior. Many injured animals struggled against sleep, their survival instincts warring with exhaustion. "It's okay," he found himself saying. "You're safe here." The words felt strange in his mouth. When was the last time he'd spoken this much? His days were usually spent in silence, broken only by the mechanical clicks of camera shutters and the tap of keyboard keys as he recorded his observations. The bear's head lowered slightly, her muscles gradually relaxing. Marcus took the opportunity to move closer, medical supplies at ready. The wounds on her flank needed cleaning to prevent infection. It was risky. Treating an injured bear went against every safety protocol he'd ever written, but leaving the wounds untreated could be fatal. He began with the largest gash, carefully cleaning away dried blood and debris. The bear tensed, but didn't move, her only reaction a low rumble deep in her chest. Marcus worked methodically, years of treating injured wildlife guiding his hands. The wounds were several days old, he estimated, but the cold had actually helped prevent infection. As he worked, his mind drifted to Sarah. She would have loved. This moment would have seen past the danger to the pure connection between human and animal. She had always possessed that ability, seeing the soul beneath the surface of every creature she treated. "They know when you're trying to help," she used to say. "They can sense your intention." A sharp crack from outside made both Marcus and the bear flinch. Her head lifted, nostrils flaring as she scented the air. Marcus noticed her reaction seemed more alert than alarmed, as though she was listening for something specific. He paused. In his treatment, watching her behavior with growing curiosity, the bear's ears swiveled toward the sound, her body tensing despite her exhaustion. Marcus recognized the change in her posture. It wasn't aggression or fear, but something else, something almost like concern. The researcher in him wanted to dismiss the anthropomorphic interpretation, but his instincts told him otherwise. "What is it?" he asked quietly, following her gaze toward the window. The floodlights still illuminated the clearing outside, their beams cutting through the swirling snow. At first, he saw nothing but the endless white of the storm. Then, a shadow moved at the edge of the light. Marcus's breath caught in his throat. Another bear, smaller and darker, emerged from the tree line. Its movements were hesitant, uncertain, as it tested each step in the deep snow. The bear in his cabin let out a soft chuff, a sound he'd heard mothers make to their cubs. Suddenly, everything clicked into place. "You have a cub," Marcus whispered, understanding flooding through him. The timing, the behavior, the desperate plea for help, it all made sense. She wasn't just seeking shelter for herself, she was trying to protect her cub. The mother bear's eyes met his, and in that moment, Marcus felt the weight of her trust. She had come to him not just for herself, but for her cub. The thought humbled him. In all his years of research, he'd documented countless examples of maternal behavior in bears, but this was different. This was active trust, a conscious choice to seek human help. Moving slowly, Marcus made his way to the door. The mother bear watched him, but made no move to stop him. If anything, her posture seemed to encourage his action. He opened the door, letting in a blast of Arctic air. The cub, hearing the sound, looked up, It was small for its age, probably from a late season birth. Like its mother, its fur was crusted with ice, though it seemed in better condition overall. The cub took a tentative step toward the cabin, then stopped uncertain. "Come on, little one," Marcus encouraged softly. The mother bear added her own gentle rumble, a sound that seemed to give the cub courage. With halting steps, it made its way through the deep snow toward the door. The cub's entry into the cabin was far more hesitant than its mother's had been. It pressed close to the wall, trying to stay as far from Marcus as possible while still making its way to its mother. Marcus remained perfectly still, hardly daring to breathe as he watched the reunion. The mother bear greeted her cub with gentle nosing, checking it over for injuries. The cub pressed against her, shivering violently as its frozen fur began to thaw. Marcus carefully closed the door, sealing them all inside together. His cabin, once a sanctuary of solitude, had become something else entirely. The sight of the mother bear and her cub, huddled together under his blankets, stirred something deep within him. It wasn't just the researchers' excitement at unprecedented behavior, though that was certainly there. It was something more personal, more profound. Moving with careful deliberation, Marcus retrieved more blankets and his emergency medical supplies. The cub would need checking too, though he suspected its condition wasn't as severe as its mother's. As he approached, the mother bear lifted her head, watching him with those intelligent eyes. There was trust there now, tentative, but real. "Let's get you both warm and patched up," he said softly, spreading another blanket over the cub. The small bear flinched at first, but settled quickly, pressed against its mother's warmth. Marcus began his examination, noting with relief that the cub appeared free of serious injury. Its main issues seemed to be cold and exhaustion, both treatable with warmth and rest. As he worked, Marcus's mind raced with questions. What had driven them from their den? Why had the mother chosen to seek human help rather than find natural shelter? The behavior was unprecedented in his experience. Bears were naturally wary of humans, their survival instincts honed by generations of conflict. The storm continued to rage outside, but inside the cabin a strange peace had settled. The mother bear's breathing had evened out, though she remained alert, watching every move Marcus made near her cub. The cub itself had begun to show signs of warming, its shivers becoming less violent as it absorbed the heat from the blankets and its mother's body. Marcus retrieved his research notebook, knowing he needed to document everything while it was fresh in his mind. This encounter could provide invaluable insights into bear behavior and intelligence, but as he began to write, he found himself recording more than just scientific observations. He wrote about the look in the mother bear's eyes when she first appeared at his door. He described the trust she had shown, not just in entering his cabin, but in allowing him near her cub. These weren't the kind of details that usually appeared in his research papers, but they felt important, necessary even. As the night deepened, Marcus found himself settling into a strange new routine. Every hour he checked the bear's conditions, noting improvements and concerns in his log. He added logs to the fire, maintaining the warm temperature that was helping them recover, and between these tasks he simply observed, witness to something he suspected few humans had ever seen. The mother bear and her cub had created a small island of tranquility in the middle of his floor, their presence transforming the familiar space into something almost sacred. Despite the potential danger, despite every scientific protocol he was breaking, Marcus felt an overwhelming sense of rightness about the situation. Sarah would have understood. She had always insisted that true research required more than just observation and data collection. It required connection, empathy, a willingness to see beyond scientific categories to the individual beings beneath. Looking at his unusual guests, Marcus began to understand what she had meant. Dawn crept over the Alaskan wilderness with hesitant fingers of pale light, barely visible through the continuing storm. Inside the cabin, Marcus sat in his research chair, his notebook filled with the night's observations. The mother bear and her cub had finally fallen into what appeared to be genuine sleep, their breathing deep and synchronized. The blankets rose and fell with their breaths, creating a strange domestic scene that belied the wild nature of his guests. The first rays of morning light filtering through his frost-covered windows revealed new details about the bear's conditions. The mother's wounds, cleaned and treated as best he could manage, looked slightly better in the daylight. The swelling had decreased, though the deep gouges still concerned him. The pattern of injury continued to suggest some kind of trap or snare, and the thought rekindled his anger at illegal trappers. Marcus rose quietly from his chair, careful not to disturb the sleeping pair. He needed to document their conditions more thoroughly while they rested. His camera, a professional-grade DSLR with a silent shutter, would let him capture images without disturbing them. As he photographed the injuries, his trained eye caught details he'd missed in the dim light of night. The mother bear's right paw showed signs of frostbite. The skin darkened and raw around the edges. That explained her awkward gait when she'd first appeared at his door. The cub, while free of major injuries, showed signs of malnutrition, its frame slightly too thin for its size, its fur lacking the usual glossy health of a well-fed bear cub. His research mind began piecing together their story. Something, likely an illegal trap, had caught the mother, forcing them to abandon their den during hibernation. The wounds suggested she'd fought free, but the struggle and exposure had taken their toll. They'd been wandering in the storm, possibly for days, before finding his cabin. The real question was why they'd sought human help. Bears typically avoided human structures, even in extreme conditions. Yet this mother had not only approached his cabin, but had somehow communicated her need for help. The behavior went against everything he thought he knew about bear psychology. A soft whimper from the cub drew his attention. The small bear was stirring, its nose twitching as it caught unfamiliar scents. Marcus remained still, watching as the cub lifted its head, blinking in confusion at its strange surroundings. The mother bear remained asleep, exhaustion apparently overwhelming her protective instincts. The cub's eyes met Marcus's, and he saw none of the fear he would have expected. Instead, there was curiosity, an almost dog-like tilt to its head as it studied him. Keeping his movements slow and gentle, Marcus reached for the container of honey he kept in his research supplies. He'd used it before to help rehabilitate smaller animals, but never with bears. "Easy there, little one," he murmured, unscrewing the cap. The cub's nose twitched more rapidly, obviously catching the sweet scent. Marcus placed a small amount of honey on a flat wooden board, then carefully slid it toward the bears. The cub watched the offering approach, its interest clear but tempered with caution. The mother bear's eyes opened at the scent of honey, her massive head lifting slightly. She watched as Marcus pushed the board closer, then made a soft, huffing sound that seemed to give her cub permission. The small bear stretched forward, its tongue darting out to taste the offering. The simple act of feeding them filled Marcus with an emotion he couldn't quite name. It wasn't just scientific fascination, though that was certainly present. It was something deeper, more personal, a connection that transcended the usual boundaries between human and wild animal. The scanner on his desk crackled to life, making both bears jump. "Attention all units and residents. Storm warning remains. In effect, multiple reports of unusual wildlife activity continue. Exercise extreme caution." Marcus moved quickly to lower the volume, but the interruption had broken the peaceful moment. The mother bear was fully alert now, her posture tense as she scanned the cabin. The cub pressed against her, honey forgotten in the moment of stress. Marcus kept his movements slow and deliberate as he checked the weather station readings. The storm showed no signs of abating. If anything, it had intensified. A new concern began to form in his mind. The bear's presence in his cabin couldn't be a long-term solution. Eventually they would need to return to the wild. But with the mothers, injuries and the continuing storm, that moment couldn't come yet. They needed time to heal, to regain their strength. His attention was drawn to the mother bear's injured paw. The frostbite worried him. He'd seen the damage it could do, how quickly tissue could deteriorate if not properly treated. He had basic medical supplies, but treating frostbite in a wild bear was well outside his experience. Moving with careful deliberation, Marcus approached the bears again, medical kit in hand. The mother watched him, but her posture remained relaxed. She seemed to understand his intentions, or at least to trust that he meant no harm. The cub, curiosity overcoming caution, actually leaned forward to sniff at the medical supplies. "This might sting a bit," Marcus warned softly as he began cleaning the frostbitten areas. The mother bear flinched slightly, but remained still, allowing him to work. Her trust humbled him. This was a creature capable of killing him with a single swipe, yet she was letting him tend to her wounds. As he worked, Marcus's mind wandered to the implications of this encounter. The scientific significance was enormous. This level of trust between wild bears and a human was unprecedented. But there was something more, something that went beyond scientific observation. These bears had chosen to seek help, had somehow recognized that he might provide it. Their presence in his cabin challenged everything he thought he knew about wildlife behavior, about the boundaries between wild and tame, about the capacity for trust between species. The cub, growing bolder, began to explore the cabin more thoroughly, though never straying far from its mother. It showed particular interest in Marcus's camera equipment, nosing at the lens caps and straps. The sight made him smile. There was something endearingly childlike about its curiosity. "Careful there," he cautioned as the cub investigated his laptop. The mother bear made a soft sound, and the cub immediately retreated to her side. The level of communication between them fascinated him. He'd studied bear behavior for years, but seeing it this close, in such intimate circumstances, was revealing nuances he'd never noticed before. The morning light grew stronger, illuminating the cabin more fully. Marcus could see the storm still raging outside, snow falling so heavily it created a white wall beyond his windows. The bears would need to stay, at least until the weather improved and the mother's injuries healed further. This realization brought practical concerns. He had enough food for himself, but feeding 2 bears, even temporarily, would require more resources. The nearest town was miles away, and in these conditions the journey would be dangerous if not impossible. The mother bear shifted position, drawing his attention back to her. She was watching him with those intelligent eyes, as if sensing his concerns. Her cub had settled against her side again, apparently tired from its explorations. The sight of them together, this little family unit that had sought his help, stirred something deep within Marcus. He thought again of Sarah, of her unwavering belief in the connection between humans and animals. She would have seen this situation as more than just an unprecedented research opportunity. She would have seen it as a gift, a chance to bridge the gap between species in a way few humans ever experienced. Marcus returned to his notebook, adding more observations. He sketched the bears' positions, noted their behaviors, recorded every detail he could. But between the clinical notes, other observations crept in, the way the mother bear's eyes followed him with what seemed like understanding, how the cub's curiosity mimicked that of any young animal learning about its world. The morning passed. In a strange rhythm of observation and care, Marcus cleaned and rebandaged the mother's wounds, offered more honey to the cub, and maintained a steady temperature in the cabin. The bears settled into a routine as well, seeming to accept their temporary sanctuary with remarkable adaptation. Around midday, the mother bear began showing signs of restlessness. Her head lifted more frequently, her nostrils flaring as she scented the air. Marcus watched her behavior with growing curiosity. There was purpose in her movements, a focus that suggested she was sensing something beyond his awareness. The cub picked up on its mother's mood, becoming more alert as well. Their synchronized behavior reminded Marcus of something he'd observed in his field research, how bear cubs learned to read and respond to their mother's signals. But there was something different about this interaction, something that seemed more urgent. Marcus moved to the window, trying to see what might have caught their attention. The storm still reduced visibility to mere feet, the world beyond his cabin lost in a swirl of white. Yet the mother bear's behavior suggested she was detecting something specific, something that concerned her. Her eyes met his again, and Marcus felt that same connection he'd experienced the night before. There was a message in her gaze, an attempt to communicate something important. He found himself wishing he could understand, could bridge the gap between their species more completely. "What is it?" he asked softly, knowing she couldn't answer but feeling compelled to ask anyway. The mother bear rose to her feet, moving with more strength than she'd shown previously. The cub stayed close to her side as she approached the cabin. "Door!" Marcus felt a moment of panic. They couldn't leave, not in this weather, not with her injuries still healing. But the bear stopped at the door, turning to look at him with what seemed like expectation. She wasn't trying to leave, he realized. She wanted him to understand something. The research part of his mind warned against anthropomorphizing, against attributing human motivations to wild animal behavior. But there was something happening here that went beyond scientific categorization. These bears were showing levels of intelligence and communication he'd never documented before. As he watched them, Marcus began to understand that his role in this situation was more than just that of a researcher or even a caretaker. He was being drawn into something larger, something that would challenge his understanding of wildlife, behavior, and perhaps even his understanding of himself. The storm continued its assault on the Alaskan wilderness, but inside the cabin, a different kind of weather was brewing. Something was coming. Marcus could feel it in the mother bear's urgency, see it in the cub's growing alertness. Whatever had driven them to seek his help in the first place wasn't finished with them yet. The mother bear's behavior grew increasingly, urgent as the day wore on. Her attention remained fixed on the door, her powerful frame tense with anticipation. The cub, feeding off its mother's energy, paced in small circles, occasionally letting out soft whimpers that tugged at Marcus's. Art! Something was clearly troubling them, but what? Marcus moved to his research station, pulling up weather data on his laptop. The storm was intensifying, if anything, a massive system that had stalled over the Kenai Peninsula, trapping them all in its frozen grip. But the bear's behavior suggested they were responding to something more specific than weather conditions. He grabbed his binoculars and moved to the window, scanning what little he could see of the surrounding forest. The visibility was poor, the swirling snow creating a curtain that his eyes couldn't penetrate. Yet the mother bear's reaction suggested she was sensing something beyond the storm, something that had managed to pierce through the howling wind to reach her awareness. The radio scanner crackled again, drawing his attention. Additional reports of unusual wildlife activity in sectors 7 and 9. Multiple bears sighted outside of normal hibernation patterns. Exercise extreme caution. Marcus's pulse quickened. Multiple bears? This wasn't just about his unexpected guests. Something was disrupting the entire local population. The mother bear let out a low rumble, different from any sound she'd made before. The cub pressed closer to her side, its small frame trembling slightly. Marcus had studied bear vocalizations extensively, but this sound was new to him. A mix of warning and worry that seemed to vibrate through the cabin's wooden walls. Moving slowly, Marcus retrieved his thermal imaging camera from his equipment shelf. It was an expensive piece of gear, usually reserved for tracking wildlife movement patterns in his research. Now he hoped it might reveal what the bears were, sensing beyond the storm's white wall. The camera's display showed the expected heat signatures, the warm interior of his cabin, the bear's substantial thermal presence, the cold void of the storm outside. But as he panned across the tree line, something caught his eye. There, at the edge of the camera's range, were more heat signatures moving through the forest. More bears, he breathed, adjusting the camera's focus. The thermal images showed at least 3 distinct shapes, their movement pattern suggesting they were searching for something, or someone. The mother bear's behavior suddenly made more sense. She had detected the approach of other bears, possibly from her own family group. The implications hit Marcus like a physical force. If these were indeed members of the mother's family group, they might have been searching for her and the cub since they left their den. Bears were known to maintain complex social relationships, particularly among related females. The unusual weather patterns might have driven them to abandon normal hibernation behavior in search of their missing family members. The mother bear's eyes met his again, and Marcus felt that now familiar jolt of connection. She wasn't just alerting him to the presence of other bears. She was asking for his help again. The realization both thrilled and terrified him. Helping 2 bears was already pushing the boundaries of safety and logic. Taking in more would be absolutely unprecedented. Yet as he watched the mother bear's careful interactions with her cub, saw the intelligence and trust in her gaze, Marcus knew he couldn't refuse. These bears had chosen to seek human help, had demonstrated a level of intelligence and social complexity that challenged everything he thought he knew about their species. He couldn't abandon them now. The thermal camera showed the approaching bears moving closer, their heat signatures growing larger on the display. They were moving with purpose, following some signal that cut through the storm's fury. Marcus wondered if they could smell the mother and cub, or if there was some other form of communication happening beyond human perception. The cub had begun, making soft calling sounds, similar to those Marcus had documented in his research when separated cubs sought to reunite with family members. The mother bear added her own vocalizations, deeper and more resonant. They were calling to the approaching bears, Marcus realized, guiding them through the storm. Moving to his research station, Marcus began preparing for the possibility of more guests. He gathered additional medical supplies, more blankets, and the remaining containers of honey. If these new bears were also injured or suffering from exposure, they would need immediate care. The mother bear's posture had changed. Though still alert, she seemed less tense, more expectant. She moved closer to the door, her cub following closely. Marcus understood. She wanted to be ready when the others arrived. Her trust in him had expanded to include her extended family, a development that both honored and humbled him. Through the thermal camera, Marcus watched as the approaching bears reached the edge of his clearing. They moved with the caution typical of their species, but there was purpose in their advance. The mother bear let out another call, and the heat signatures. Outside responded, moving more quickly now. Marcus's hand moved to the door handle, his heart pounding. He was about to do something unprecedented in wildlife research, deliberately invite a group of wild bears into human shelter. The scientific part of his mind was already composing the paper this would generate, while another part wondered if he was completely insane. The mother bear's presence beside him steadied his nerves. She had shown him that bears were capable of far more intelligence and trust than anyone had suspected. If she believed her family members could share this temporary sanctuary, who was he to doubt? The wind howled as Marcus opened the door, snow swirling into the cabin. Through the white haze, dark shapes emerged. 3 bears, their fur crusted with ice, moving with the same desperate purpose he'd seen in the mother the night before. They stopped at the threshold, their breath steaming in the frozen air. Marcus stepped back, creating space for them to enter. The mother bear made a soft sound of encouragement, and one by one, the new bears entered the cabin. They moved with surprising grace for creatures their size, careful not to bump into anything despite their obvious exhaustion. As the last bear entered, Marcus closed the door against the storm, sealing them all inside together. The new arrivals stood uncertainly in the middle of his cabin, their presence making the space seem suddenly much smaller. They were all adult females, he noted, probably related to the mother bear, sisters, or perhaps daughters from previous years. The reunion that followed brought tears to Marcus's eyes. The bears greeted each other with gentle touches and soft vocalizations, their behavior showing none of the aggression often associated with their species. The cub moved among them, receiving nuzzles and attention from each adult. They were clearly a family group, their bonds evident in every interaction. Marcus observed their behavior with growing amazement. The social dynamics he was witnessing went far beyond anything documented in scientific literature. These bears were demonstrating levels of cooperation and communication that challenged existing understanding of their species. The new bears showed signs of exposure and exhaustion, though none appeared to have injuries as severe as the mothers. They accepted Marcus's presence with remarkable calm, seemingly taking their cue from the mother bear's trust in him. One by one, they settled onto the blankets he provided, their massive bodies arranging themselves with surprising consideration for the limited space. The cub moved between the adults, clearly delighted by the reunion. Its behavior had changed completely. Gone was the nervous energy from earlier, replaced by what could only be described as joy. The adults watched it with what seemed like indulgence, occasionally reaching out to guide it back when it strayed too far. Marcus began his medical assessment of the new arrivals, moving carefully among them with his supplies. They allowed his approach, though he could sense their initial uncertainty. The mother bear watched from nearby, her presence seeming to reassure the others that he could be trusted. As he worked, Marcus's mind raced with questions. What had driven this family group to abandon hibernation and search for their missing members? How had they managed to track the mother and cub through the storm? And most intriguingly, how had they all come to accept human assistance so readily? The bears settled into a loose circle, their bodies creating a wall of fur and warmth. The cub moved to the center of the group, finally showing signs of tiring from all the excitement. The adults maintained a quiet vigilance, their breaths synchronizing in a way that filled the cabin with a gentle rhythm. Marcus retreated to his research station, unable to stop watching this unprecedented gathering. His cabin had become something extraordinary, a sanctuary where the boundaries between wild and tame, between human and animal, had blurred into something entirely new. The storm continued its assault outside, but inside the cabin, a different kind of weather prevailed. The presence of the bear family had transformed the space into something almost sacred, a pocket of warmth and connection in the midst of winter's fury. Marcus felt privileged to witness it, to be accepted into this circle of trust and family bonds. As night approached, Marcus found himself facing a new reality. His cabin now housed 6 bears, 5 adults and 1 cub, all of whom seemed to have accepted his presence as natural and necessary. The scientific implications were staggering, but the emotional impact was even more profound. The night deepened around Marcus's cabin, the storm's fury providing a constant backdrop to the extraordinary scene within. His research station had become an impromptu observation post where he documented every interaction between the bears with meticulous detail. The family group had arranged themselves in a protective circle, their massive bodies creating a living barrier around the cub who slept peacefully in their midst. Marcus watched as the bears communicated through subtle movements and soft vocalizations. Their behavior challenged everything he thought he knew about bear social structures. While researchers had long known that bears, particularly females, maintained social bonds, the level of cooperation and communication he was witnessing went far beyond documented behavior. The original mother bear, whom Marcus had begun thinking of as the matriarch, maintained a position where she could watch both her family and him. Her wounds were healing, though the frost-bitten areas on her paw still concerned him. The other bears showed similar signs of exposure and exhaustion, but their conditions were improving with warmth and rest. As he observed them, Marcus noticed patterns emerging in their behavior. The bears seemed to take turns maintaining watchfulness, shifting positions with a coordination that spoke of long-established social bonds. When the cub stirred, each adult responded, ready to offer comfort or protection as needed. The radio scanner cut through the quiet with another update. Attention all units. Multiple reports of den site disturbances in Sector 12. Possible illegal activity. Investigation pending weather conditions. Marcus's hands tightened on his notebook. Sector 12. That was just a few miles from his cabin. The matriarch lifted her head at the sound, her eyes meeting Marcus's with what seemed like understanding. He remembered the trap wounds on her flank, the pattern that had suggested human interference. A theory began forming in his mind, pieces clicking into place with disturbing clarity. Someone had been targeting bear dens, perhaps looking for cubs to sell into the illegal exotic pet trade. The practice was unfortunately common in some areas, with hibernating bears being particularly vulnerable. The trappers would force mothers and cubs out of their dens, often separating families in the process. The thought made his blood boil. This family group hadn't just been driven out by the storm, they'd been deliberately displaced by human greed. Yet instead of responding with aggression, they'd sought help from another human, somehow recognizing that not all humans meant them harm. Marcus moved to his research computer, pulling up maps of known den sites in the area. He'd been tracking local bear populations for years, marking their territories and preferred denning locations. The recent reports of disturbances formed a pattern, suggesting systematic targeting of bear dens, moving progressively through the preserve. A soft sound drew his attention back to the bears. The cub had awakened and was watching him with curious eyes. Its mother, the matriarch, made a gentle huffing sound, and the cub carefully picked its way through the circle of adults toward Marcus. He remained perfectly still as the small bear approached. This level of trust was unprecedented. Bear. Cubs typically stayed close to their mothers, particularly in unfamiliar situations. Yet this cub moved with confidence, seemingly unafraid of human presence. The cub stopped a few feet from Marcus, sitting back on its haunches to study him. Its behavior reminded him of his research notes on bear intelligence and learning capacity. Cubs learned primarily through observation and imitation, taking cues from their mothers about what was safe and what wasn't. The matriarch watched the interaction carefully, but made no move to call the cub back. Her trust in Marcus had apparently extended to allowing this close contact with her offspring. The implications for bear-human relationships were staggering. Marcus slowly reached for his camera, wanting to document this extraordinary moment. The cub watched with interest as he raised the camera, showing no fear of the device. He managed to capture several images of the cub's curious expression before it decided to investigate the camera itself. "Careful there, little one," Marcus murmured as the cub sniffed at the lens. The other bears remained alert but calm, apparently accepting this interaction between the cub and the human. Their trust humbled him, especially given what they had likely experienced at the hands of other humans. The scanner crackled again, this time with a transmission that made Marcus's heart race. "Be advised. Suspicious vehicle spotted near Miller's. Creek Trail. Large enclosed trailer, no visible registration, unable to pursue due to weather conditions." Miller's Creek was less than 10 miles from his cabin. If poachers were still in the area, actively hunting during the storm. Marcus glanced at the bears, his protective instincts rising. These remarkable creatures had chosen to trust him, had sought sanctuary in his cabin. He couldn't let them down. The matriarch seemed to sense his concern. She rose carefully, mindful of her healing injuries, and moved to join her cub near Marcus. The other bears shifted, maintaining their protective formation even as they adjusted to the movement of their leader. Marcus found himself face to face with the massive bear, close, enough to see the flecks of gold in her brown eyes. There was intelligence there, and something more, a clear attempt to communicate. She looked toward his computer screen, then back at him, her gaze intense. "You know what's happening, don't you?" he asked softly. "You're trying to tell me about the others." The bear's response was a low rumble, neither threatening nor fearful. It was almost conversational, as if she was confirming his understanding. Moving slowly, Marcus pulled up more detailed maps on his computer. The bear watched the screen, her attention focused on the moving images. He marked the locations of the reported disturbances, creating a visual pattern of the poachers' movements. The other bears had risen now, gathering around their matriarch. The cub stayed close to Marcus, seemingly comfortable in its position between human and bear observers. Together, they formed an unlikely council of species, united by a common threat. Marcus's research training warred with his instincts. The scientific part of his mind insisted that bears couldn't possibly understand human technology, couldn't be actively participating in an investigation. Yet the evidence before his eyes suggested otherwise. The bears were showing levels of intelligence and social cooperation that went far beyond documented behavior. Their choice to seek human help, their ability to communicate their needs, their acceptance of his presence, all of it suggested capabilities that science had yet to acknowledge. As if to emphasize this point, the matriarch reached out one massive paw, carefully touching the computer screen. Her claw tapped against a specific location, a known denning area that hadn't yet appeared in the disturbance reports. Marcus's pulse quickened as he understood. "There are more bears in danger," he said, marking the location. "That's what you've been trying to tell me." The matriarch's response was immediate, a soft huff of what seemed like approval. The other bears moved closer, their attention focused on the map. Marcus began plotting the pattern of den sites and disturbance reports. If his analysis was correct, the poachers were moving systematically through the preserve, targeting known denning areas. The storm had probably slowed them down, but it hadn't stopped their activities. The bears watched his work with what could only be described as intelligent interest. When he marked another potential target area, the matriarch made a sound that drew immediate attention from her family group. They responded with their own vocalizations, creating a complex exchange that Marcus wished he could understand. The cub, perhaps picking up on the intensity of the moment, pressed closer to Marcus's side. He found himself automatically reaching down to reassure it, then froze as he realized what he was doing. Yet the cub seemed to appreciate the gesture, letting out a soft sound, almost like a purr. Outside, the storm continued its assault on the Alaskan wilderness. But inside the cabin, something extraordinary was taking shape. Human and bears, species separated by millennia of evolution and conflict, were finding common ground in the face of a shared threat. Marcus looked at his unlikely companions, 5 adult bears and a cub, all showing levels of intelligence and social complexity that defied scientific understanding. They had chosen to trust him, to seek his help not just for themselves, but for others of their kind still in danger. The responsibility settled on his shoulders like a physical weight. These bears had risked everything by approaching a human, defying their natural instincts in a desperate bid for help. He couldn't let them down. Whatever was coming, they would face it together. As night settled more deeply over the cabin, Marcus continued his analysis, aware of the bears watching his every move. The storm howled outside, but it no longer seemed like the greatest threat they faced. Something worse was moving through the preserve, threatening bears already vulnerable from winter's grip. The matriarch settled beside his research station, her massive presence both reassuring and surreal. The other bears maintained their protective formation, though now it seemed to include him in its circle. The cub, tired from all the excitement, had curled up against his chair, its trust complete and humbling. The first light of dawn brought little change to the storm's intensity, but inside Marcus's cabin, the atmosphere was charged with purpose. The bears had maintained their vigilant watch through the night, taking turns resting while always keeping at least 2 adults alert. Their behavior continued to amaze him. This level of coordinated activity suggested social structures far more complex than previously documented. Marcus had spent the night analyzing data and monitoring radio transmissions. The pattern of den disturbances was becoming clearer, and with it, his understanding of what had driven this bear family to seek human help. The poachers were working their way systematically through the preserve, using the storm as cover for their illegal activities. The matriarch hadn't left his side, her attention focused on the maps and data displayed on his computer screen. Her intelligence continued to challenge his scientific understanding. She seemed to comprehend not just the immediate situation, but the broader implications of the information he was gathering. "Look at this," he murmured, marking another potential target area on the map. The bear's response was immediate, a soft rumble that brought the others to attention. The cub, which had been dozing near his feet, lifted its head with interest. The family group's coordination was remarkable, their responses suggesting a level of communication that went beyond simple instinct. The radio scanner crackled to life again. Additional tracks spotted near Echo Ridge, large vehicle, possibly matching previous reports, unable to pursue due to weather conditions. Marcus checked his map, Echo Ridge was closer than the previous sightings, suggesting the poachers were moving in their direction. The matriarch's reaction to the transmission was striking. She turned to her family group, making a series of soft vocalizations that resulted in immediate response. The other bears shifted positions, creating a tighter protective circle around the cub. Their behavior suggested not just understanding, but strategic thinking. Marcus moved to his equipment storage, gathering gear he normally used for wildlife. Tracking. If the poachers were getting closer, he needed to be prepared. His cabin's location was relatively isolated, but not impossible to find for someone familiar with the preserve. The bears watched his preparations with evident interest. The matriarch, in particular, seemed to be following his movements with understanding. When he pulled out his satellite phone, reserved for emergencies, she made a soft sound that drew the attention of the others. "I need to alert the authorities," he explained, finding himself talking to the bears as if they could understand. Given their behavior so far, perhaps they could. But the storm's probably blocking the signal. He moved to the window, searching for better reception, but the device remained stubbornly silent. The matriarch approached him, her movement drawing his attention to the window. Through the swirling snow, dark shapes were moving among the trees. Marcus's heart jumped until he realized these weren't human figures. They were more bears, making their way toward his cabin. "More of your family?" he asked softly. The matriarch's response was a gentle huff. Her posture relaxed despite the approach of new bears. The others in the cabin maintained their calm as well, suggesting these newcomers were indeed known to them. Marcus watched in amazement as 3 more bears emerged from the storm. Like the others, they showed signs of having been driven from their dens. Their fur was matted with ice, their movements showing exhaustion, but there was purpose in their approach, suggesting they had been deliberately seeking this location. The matriarch moved to the door, clearly expecting Marcus to open it. He did so without hesitation, his trust in her judgment now complete. The new bears entered cautiously, but without fear, their behavior suggesting they had somehow been informed about the safety of this strange sanctuary. The reunion that followed provided new insights into bear social behavior. The newcomers were greeted with gentle touches and soft vocalizations, welcomed into the protective circle around the cub. Marcus observed complex greeting rituals he had never seen documented in scientific literature. His cabin now housed 9 bears, 8 adults and 1 cub. The space should have felt crowded, dangerous even, but instead there was a sense of order and purpose. The bears arranged themselves with careful consideration for both space and social hierarchy, their movements coordinated and deliberate. The new arrivals showed signs of recent encounters with humans. One had a fresh wound, similar to the matriarch's, suggesting another trap encounter. Marcus gathered his medical supplies, approaching the injured bear with careful movements. The others watched, but made no aggressive moves, apparently accepting his role as healer. As he treated the wound, Marcus's mind worked through the implications of what he was witnessing. These bears weren't just seeking shelter from the storm. They were actively organizing, sharing information, and coordinating their movements. The level of social cooperation suggested capabilities far beyond current scientific understanding. The matriarch supervised his treatment of the injured bear, her presence seeming to reassure both patient and healer. The cub watched from its protected position within the group, its curiosity about the newcomers tempered by the adult's careful guidance. The radio scanner continued to provide updates about suspicious activity in the preserve, each transmission drawing immediate attention from the bears. They were clearly monitoring the human communications, their reactions suggesting understanding of the potential threats being discussed. Marcus returned to his maps, adding the new data points from the latest reports. The pattern was becoming more urgent. The poachers were definitely moving in their direction, perhaps following the same tracks the bears had used to find his cabin. The matriarch studied the updated map, her attention particularly focused on areas where den sites were marked. She made a series of soft sounds that resulted in immediate responses from the others. Marcus wished he could understand their communication, but the complexity of their exchanges was beyond his current knowledge. The cub had begun moving between the adults, receiving gentle attention from each one. Its behavior suggested it was related to all of them, supporting Marcus's theory about extended family groups among bears. The social bonds he was witnessing went far beyond the simple mother-cub relationships documented in scientific literature. A particularly strong gust of wind rattled the cabin's windows, drawing everyone's attention. The storm showed no signs of weakening, which provided both protection and challenge. The weather would make it difficult for poachers to operate, but it also limited Marcus's ability to contact authorities or gather more information. The bears seemed to understand the situation's complexity. They maintained their vigilant watch, while conserving energy, their behavior suggesting both intelligence and strategic thinking. The newcomers had integrated seamlessly into the group, adding to the collective awareness rather than causing disruption. Marcus continued his documentation, knowing that what he was witnessing could revolutionize understanding of bear behavior. The social complexity, the apparent ability to share information across extended family groups, the willingness to seek human assistance, all of it challenged current scientific paradigms. The matriarch remained near his research station, her presence both reassuring and surreal. She seemed to be actively participating in his analysis, her attention focused on the maps and data he was gathering. The other bears responded to her subtle signals, maintaining their protective formation while staying alert to potential threats. As the morning progressed, Marcus found himself increasingly integrated into the bears' social structure. They had accepted his presence not just as a provider of shelter and medical care, but as an active participant in their response to the threat they faced. The trust they showed him was both humbling and empowering. The cub, perhaps sensing the shift in group dynamics, had begun treating him as one of its protectors. It would occasionally approach his research station, checking on his activities, before returning to the safety of the adult bears. Its trust was complete and unreserved, suggesting it had no memory or instinct of humans as threats. Through the window, the storm continued its assault on the Alaskan wilderness. But inside the cabin, something extraordinary was taking shape. A partnership between species, united by common purpose and mutual trust. Marcus looked at his unlikely companions, knowing that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. The radio scanner's updates had become more frequent, suggesting increased activity despite the storm. Each transmission drew immediate attention from the bears, their reactions confirming Marcus's belief in their ability to understand human communications. They were actively gathering intelligence, using every available source of information to assess the threats they faced. As Marcus continued his analysis, he realized that his cabin had become more than just a sanctuary. It had become a command center for an unprecedented alliance between human and bears, united in their determination to protect their wilderness, home from those who would exploit it. A sudden burst of static from the radio scanner shattered the cabin's focused atmosphere. Multiple signals detected near Blackwater Ridge. Heavy equipment, possible illegal activity. The transmission cut through the storm's howl, drawing immediate attention from both Marcus and his ursine companions. The matriarch rose. From her position near his research station, her massive frame tense with renewed purpose. Marcus quickly checked his maps. Blackwater Ridge was less than 3 miles from his cabin, much closer than previous reports had indicated. The poachers were definitely moving in their direction, using the storm as cover for their operations. The bears' agitation suggested they understood the implications all too well. The family group shifted formation, moving with coordinated precision that still amazed him. 8 adult bears and 1 cub, arranging themselves to maximize both protection and observation. The newcomers had integrated seamlessly into the group's dynamics, their behavior suggesting long-established social bonds. "They're getting closer," Marcus murmured, marking the new location on his map. The matriarch made a soft sound that brought the others to attention. Their response was immediate and coordinated. 2 bears moved to the windows, while others tightened their protective circle around the cub. Through the swirling snow, Marcus caught glimpses of movement in the forest. His trained eye recognized the patterns. More bears were approaching, their dark shapes barely visible through the storm. The matriarch watched calmly, her posture suggesting these were expected arrivals. Indeed, within minutes, 4 more bears emerged from the white void. Like the others, they showed signs of having been driven from their dens, ice-crusted fur, exhaustion evident in their movements, but purpose in their approach. The family group inside the cabin reacted with soft vocalizations, clearly recognizing the newcomers. Marcus moved to open the door, no longer surprised by the steady increase in his unusual guests. The new bears entered with the same careful awareness he'd observed in the others, their behavior suggesting they had somehow been informed about this sanctuary and its human keeper. His cabin now housed 13 bears, 12 adults, and 1 cub. The space should have been impossibly crowded, dangerously so, yet the bears arranged themselves with remarkable efficiency. Their movements showed both intelligence and consideration, maintaining clear paths and sightlines despite their numbers. Several of the newcomers bore fresh wounds, confirming Marcus's fears about ongoing poaching activities. He gathered his medical supplies, approaching the injured bears with the quiet confidence born of recent experience. The others watched, but remained calm, the matriarch's presence seeming to validate his role as healer. As he worked, Marcus's scientific mind catalogued every detail of their behavior. The social complexity he was witnessing went far beyond anything documented in research literature. These bears weren't just seeking shelter, they were actively organizing, sharing information, and coordinating their responses to a common threat. The cub moved between the adults, receiving gentle attention from each one. Its behavior suggested it was connected to all of them, supporting theories about extended family groups that Marcus had long suspected but never been able to prove. The social bonds on display were revolutionary in their implications for understanding bear intelligence. A particularly strong gust of wind rattled the cabin's windows, drawing everyone's attention. One of the newcomers made a low sound that caused immediate reaction among the others. They shifted positions, their movements suggesting they were sharing information about conditions outside. Marcus returned to his research station, updating his maps with the latest data. The pattern of poaching activities was becoming clearer and more disturbing. The poachers were systematically targeting known den sites, using the storm as cover for their operations. Their movements suggested they had inside information about bear locations in the preserve. The matriarch watched, his work intently, her eyes following his markers on the map. When he indicated another potential target area, she made a sound that drew immediate attention from the group. The other bears responded with their own vocalizations, creating a complex exchange that Marcus wished he could fully understand. The radio scanner crackled again. "Be advised, large vehicle spotted on old logging road near Sector 7. Unable to pursue due to weather conditions." Marcus checked his map. Sector 7 was practically on their doorstep. The poachers were getting dangerously close. The bears' reaction to the transmission was immediate and coordinated. They rearranged themselves again, creating what Marcus recognized as defensive positions around the cabin's entry points. Their strategy showed both intelligence and experience. They were preparing for potential confrontation. Marcus moved to his equipment storage, gathering gear he might need if the situation escalated. The bears watched his preparations with evident interest, particularly when he checked his tranquilizer rifle, a tool he normally used only for research purposes. The matriarch approached as he worked, her presence both reassuring and commanding. She seemed to understand the weapons he was preparing, showing no fear, but rather what appeared to be approval. The other bears maintained their positions, but watched the preparations carefully. Through the window, the storm continued its relentless assault on the Alaskan wilderness. The wind howled around the cabin's corners, driving snow into ever deeper drifts. Under normal circumstances, the weather would make travel nearly impossible. But Marcus suspected the poachers would persist. They were too close to their targets to stop now. The cub had settled near his feet, its trust in him now complete and unquestioning. The sight filled Marcus with both joy and concern. This young bear represented the future of its species, a future threatened by human greed and ignorance. Yet here it was, seeking protection from a human it had learned to trust. The other bears had begun taking turns resting, maintaining a rotation that kept fresh eyes on all potential approach routes to the cabin. Their coordination continued to amaze Marcus. This level of strategic thinking suggested capabilities far beyond current scientific understanding of bear intelligence. A sudden change in the wind's pitch drew everyone's attention. The matriarch moved to the window, her posture alert but not alarmed. Outside, the storm's pattern had shifted, creating brief moments of visibility through the swirling snow. In one of these moments, Marcus caught sight of something that made his blood run cold. Distant headlights, moving slowly through the wilderness. The bears had seen it too. Their reaction was immediate but controlled. No panic, just focused intensity as they adjusted their positions. The cub was quickly moved to the most protected corner of the cabin, surrounded by alert adults. The matriarch remained by Marcus's side, her presence steady and determined. Marcus checked his satellite phone again, but the storm still blocked any signal. They were on their own, a small group of bears and one human, facing a threat that had driven them together against all natural instincts. The irony wasn't lost on him. He had spent years studying these magnificent creatures, only to find himself learning their most extraordinary capabilities under these desperate circumstances. The radio scanner provided another update, this one broken and static-filled. Multiple vehicles, heavy equipment. Approach with extreme caution. The transmission faded into static, but its message was clear. The poachers weren't just a small operation. They were well-equipped and organized. The matriarch made a sound that brought immediate response from her family group. The bears moved with renewed purpose, their formations suggesting they were preparing for multiple scenarios. Their strategic thinking continued to challenge Marcus's understanding of their capabilities. He returned to his maps, marking the latest reported positions. The pattern was now unmistakable. The poachers were systematically sweeping through the preserve, using the storm as cover for their operations. Their current trajectory would bring them directly to his cabin's location. The bears watched his analysis with focused attention. When he pointed out potential approach routes, they adjusted their positions accordingly. The level of comprehension they showed was extraordinary. They weren't just reacting to immediate threats, but understanding and preparing for potential future scenarios. Outside, the storm's fury seemed to intensify, as if nature itself was responding to the approaching threat. The wind howled through the trees, creating an eerie counterpoint to the soft sounds of bears moving within the cabin. Marcus checked his gear one final time, knowing that the next few hours would likely bring direct confrontation. The cub pressed against his leg, seeking reassurance. Marcus found himself automatically reaching down to comfort it, the gesture now natural despite its extraordinary nature. The other bears watched but showed no concern. They had accepted him completely as part of their protective circle. As darkness began to fall, Marcus Thorne and his 13 bear companions prepared for what might come. The cabin had become more than just a sanctuary. It was now a fortress, protecting not just wildlife, but the very principle of trust between species. Whatever happened next would challenge not only their survival instincts, but their unprecedented alliance. The matriarch's eyes met his, filled with intelligence and determination. In that moment, Marcus knew that their partnership, however unlikely, was their greatest strength. Together, they would face whatever emerged from the storm's white void, united in their defense of something far more precious than mere survival. The headlights Marcus had glimpsed through the storm grew steadily closer, their approach marked by the distant rumble of heavy engines. Inside the cabin, the bears maintained their vigilant positions, their behavior showing both discipline and strategic awareness. The matriarch stood by the window, her massive frame silhouetted against the gathering darkness, watching the approaching threat with calculated intensity. Marcus checked his equipment one final time, tranquilizer rifle, satellite phone still, searching for signal, and his research camera set to night vision mode. The bears watched his preparations with evident understanding, their own positions carefully coordinated to cover all potential entry points to the cabin. The radio scanner crackled with increasing frequency, its transmissions painting a clearer picture of the approaching danger. Multiple vehicles confirmed, heavy equipment in convoy, possible illegal transport containers observed. Each update drew immediate attention from the bears, their reactions suggesting they understood the implications all too well. Through the storm's swirling curtain, Marcus could now make out the shapes of several vehicles, at least 3 large trucks and what appeared to be a horse trailer, likely modified for transporting captured wildlife. The poachers were well equipped and organized, confirming his fears about the scale of their operation. The matriarch made a soft sound that initiated immediate response from her family group. The 12 adult bears adjusted their positions with practiced efficiency, creating overlapping zones of protection around the cub. Their strategic thinking continued to amaze Marcus. This went far beyond instinctive behavior. "They're almost here," he murmured, more to himself than his companions. But the bears responded to his voice, their attention focusing briefly on him before returning to their defensive positions. The trust they showed him, their willingness to coordinate with a human in the face of danger, was unprecedented in his experience. The approaching vehicles had slowed, clearly struggling with the deteriorating weather conditions. Marcus estimated they were still about half a mile out, their progress hampered by the deepening snow. The storm, which had seemed like such a threat earlier, was now providing them with valuable time. The cub pressed against Marcus's leg, seeking reassurance. He reached down automatically, his hand gentle on its fur. The other bears watched but showed no concern. His role as protector had been fully accepted by the entire group. The depth of trust they showed him was both humbling and empowering. A sudden change in the engine's sound drew everyone's attention. The vehicles had stopped, their headlights cutting through the snow in a way that suggested they were arranging themselves in a predetermined pattern. Marcus recognized the tactics. They were setting up a coordinated operation. The matriarch moved closer to his research station, her eyes fixed on his maps. When Marcus pointed out the poacher's likely position, she made a sound that brought immediate response from the others. The bears adjusted their formations again, their movements suggesting they were preparing for multiple scenarios. Through his night vision equipment, Marcus could now see figures moving between the vehicles, at least 6 people, possibly more. They were dressed for the weather and moved with purpose, suggesting this wasn't their first such operation. The sight filled him with cold anger. These were professionals who knew exactly what they were doing. The radio scanner captured fragments of their communications. Den sites marked priority on cubs, minimal damage to adults. The clinical nature of their planning made Marcus's blood boil. These weren't opportunistic poachers. This was an organized operation targeting bear families during their most vulnerable period. The bears' reaction to the transmissions was striking. Their postures shifted from defensive to actively alert, suggesting they recognized the threat not just to themselves, but to others of their kind. The matriarch made a series of soft sounds that resulted in immediate repositioning by the group. Marcus moved to check his defensive preparations. He had blocked most of the windows with his research equipment, leaving only small observation points. The door was reinforced, standard procedure for remote cabins in bear country, though he never imagined he'd be using it to protect bears rather than guard against them. The cub had been moved to the most secure corner of the cabin, surrounded by alert adults. Its behavior showed remarkable discipline for one so young. No whimpering or restless movement, just quiet attention to the adults protecting it. The social learning on display was extraordinary. Outside, the storm seemed to intensify, as if nature itself was responding to the threat. The wind howled around the cabin's corners, driving snow into ever deeper drifts. The weather would make any approach difficult, but Marcus suspected these poachers wouldn't be easily deterred. The matriarch's attention suddenly focused on something beyond the visible lights. She made a sound that brought immediate response from the others, a series of soft vocalizations that suggested they were sharing information. Marcus strained to see what had caught their attention. Through his night vision scope he spotted it, more figures moving through the trees, approaching from multiple directions. The poachers were spreading out, likely planning to surround any den sites they found. They hadn't spotted his cabin yet, but their search pattern would bring them here eventually. The bears' response to this development was remarkable. They adjusted their positions again, creating coverage of all potential approach angles. Their coordination showed both intelligence and experience. They had clearly encountered similar threats before. Marcus's satellite phone suddenly buzzed, a weak signal breaking through the storm. He moved quickly to the spot where reception seemed strongest, aware of the bears watching his movements. The matriarch remained close, her presence both protective and supportive. He managed to send a brief message to the preserve's rangers, providing coordinates and details of the poaching operation. The signal died before he could confirm receipt, but even the possibility of help on the way gave him renewed determination. The bears seemed to sense his small victory, their postures showing subtle shifts that suggested increased confidence. The matriarch made a soft sound that resulted in another reorganization of their defensive positions. They were adapting their strategy based on the possibility of reinforcements. Through the window, Marcus could see the poachers' lights moving closer, their search pattern becoming clearer. They were conducting a systematic sweep of the area, likely following information about known den sites. Their professionalism made them more dangerous. These weren't amateur hunters who might be scared off easily. The radio scanner continued to provide insights into their operation. Thermal imaging operational. Multiple signatures detected. The poachers were well equipped, using technology to locate bears in their dens. The information made Marcus's heart race. Their cabin, with 13 bears inside, would show up like a beacon on thermal imaging. The matriarch's reaction to this development was immediate and decisive. She moved through the group, making soft sounds that resulted in the bears repositioning themselves to minimize their heat signature's visibility from outside. Their strategic thinking continued to amaze Marcus. They were adapting their tactics based on the threat's capabilities. The cub remained remarkably calm throughout these movements, its behavior suggesting complete trust in both the adult bears and Marcus. It watched the preparations with intelligent interest, learning even in this dangerous situation. The sight strengthened Marcus's determination to protect these extraordinary creatures. Outside, the poachers' lights had begun to move more purposefully. They had detected something. Marcus watched through his night vision scope as they adjusted their search pattern, their movements becoming more focused. They were getting closer to discovering the cabin's location. The bears responded to this development with increased alertness, but no panic. Their formations tightened, movements becoming more deliberate and silent despite their massive size. The level of control they showed was extraordinary. These were intelligent beings making conscious tactical decisions. Marcus checked his defenses one final time, aware that direct confrontation was becoming increasingly likely. The bears watched his preparations with evident understanding, their own positions coordinated to support whatever action might become necessary. Their trust in him, their willingness to work together against a common threat, continued to humble him. The matriarch moved to his side as he completed his checks, her presence steady and reassuring. In her eyes, Marcus saw not just intelligence, but partnership. They were in this together, human and bears united against those who would harm their wilderness home. The storm's fury provided cover for both defenders and attackers, its howling, wind-masking sounds of movement, while the swirling snow complicated visual tracking. But the bears' superior senses remained sharp, their attention focused on threats even humans with advanced technology might miss. As the poachers drew closer, Marcus Thorne and his 13 bear companions prepared for confrontation. The cabin had become more than just a sanctuary. It was a fortress protecting an unprecedented alliance between species, a testament to the extraordinary capabilities of these magnificent creatures. The matriarch's quiet confidence steadied him as they waited together in the gathering darkness. Whatever emerged from the storm's white void would face not just isolated prey, but a united defense. Human intelligence and technology combined. With Ursine's strength and wisdom, the night ahead would test not only their survival instincts, but the very boundaries of trust between species. The first direct confrontation came with startling suddenness. A beam of light cut through the storm, sweeping across the cabin's front windows. The bears reacted instantly but silently, adjusting their positions to stay out of view while maintaining their defensive formation. The matriarch remained by Marcus's side, her massive frame completely still except for her eyes, which tracked every movement outside. Through his night vision scope, Marcus could see 3 figures approaching the cabin, their movements suggesting they were experienced in wilderness operations. They carried professional-grade equipment, thermal imaging devices, tranquilizer rifles, and what appeared to be specialized capture gear. "Structure detected," crackled the radio scanner, showing multiple thermal signatures, large readings consistent with target species. The clinical tone of their communications made Marcus's jaw clench. These weren't just poachers. They were professional wildlife traffickers. The bears' reaction to the transmission was remarkable. They adjusted their positions again, using the cabin's interior walls to break up their heat signatures. The matriarch directed these movements with subtle sounds, her strategic thinking continuing to amaze Marcus. They were actively countering the poachers' technology. The cub remained in its protected corner, surrounded by adult bears who had positioned themselves to shield it from both view and thermal detection. Its discipline was extraordinary. Despite the tension, it maintained complete silence, following the example of its protectors. Outside, more figures were emerging from the storm. Marcus counted at least 8 now, moving with coordinated precision that suggested military or professional training. They were setting up a perimeter around the cabin, clearly planning a systematic approach. The matriarch made a soft sound that brought immediate response from her family group. The bears shifted again, creating overlapping zones of protection that covered all potential entry points. Their movements were silent, despite their size, each position carefully chosen for maximum defensive advantage. Marcus moved to his research station, keeping low to avoid backlighting himself in the windows. The poacher's approach had cut off any possibility of using his satellite phone to call for help. They were on their own, at least for now. The radio scanner captured snippets of the poacher's planning. Heat signatures suggest multiple subjects, possible den site adaptation, prepare for mass sedation. Their preparations were thorough and professional, but they were working from a flawed assumption. They expected to find bears in a normal winter den state, drowsy, disoriented, and easily captured. What they would actually face was something unprecedented. 13 fully alert bears working in coordinated defense, guided by the strategic thinking of their matriarch, and partnered with a human who understood both species. The thought almost made Marcus smile, despite the gravity of the situation. The first attempt to breach their sanctuary came at the rear of the cabin. 2 figures approached the back door, their movements careful and practiced. Through the night, vision scope, Marcus could see them preparing specialized entry tools. They weren't planning to ask permission to enter. The bears had anticipated this approach. 4 adults had already positioned themselves near the back door, their massive frames hidden from thermal imaging by the cabin's structural elements. The matriarch watched these preparations with evident approval, her own position chosen to provide immediate support if needed. A soft metallic sound indicated the poachers were working on the door's lock. Marcus held his breath, aware of the bear's intense focus on the entry point. The matriarch made a nearly inaudible sound, and the defensive formation tightened slightly, ready for action. The door opened with surprising gentleness. These were professionals used to working quietly. 2 figures entered, their thermal imaging equipment held ready. They had taken only 2 steps inside when they realized their mistake. The bears moved with explosive power, but remarkable precision. Before the intruders could react, they found themselves surrounded by massive ursine forms, the sheer presence of 4 adult grizzlies making any movement impossible. No violence was needed. The bears simply occupied the space so completely that the poachers were rendered immobile. Marcus emerged from the shadows, tranquilizer rifle ready. "I suggest you don't move," he said quietly. "My friends here are showing remarkable restraint, but they're protecting their family. Drop your equipment. Slowly." The poachers complied, their training apparently not having prepared them for this scenario. Who could have predicted finding a cabin full of fully alert bears working in coordination with a human? Their equipment clattered to the floor, the sound drawing a warning rumble from the nearest bear. The radio scanner burst to life. Team 2, report status. The silence that followed was telling. Outside, Marcus could see the other poachers reacting to their teammates' failure to respond, their movements becoming more urgent. The matriarch made a sound that initiated another reorganization of the bears' defense. They maintained control of the captured poachers while adjusting their coverage of other potential entry points. Their tactical thinking continued to demonstrate levels of intelligence far beyond scientific documentation. Through the windows, Marcus could see the remaining poachers falling back, regrouping to assess this unexpected development. They had clearly realized this wasn't going to be a routine capture operation. Their lights swept the cabin's exterior, searching for weaknesses in its defense. The captured poachers remained frozen, their eyes wide as they watched the bears move with coordinated purpose around them. The sight of these supposedly wild animals working in intelligent cooperation with a human had shattered their assumptions about their targets. "Your operation is over," Marcus told them, his voice steady. "The preserve rangers have been alerted, and they'll be very interested in your equipment and methods." He wasn't entirely sure his earlier message had gotten through, but the poachers didn't need to know that. The matriarch moved to his side, her presence adding weight to his words. She studied the captured poachers with evident intelligence, her gaze making them shrink back despite their professional experience. The other bears maintained their positions, their discipline unbroken. Outside, the storm's intensity seemed to increase, nature itself supporting their defense. The wind drove snow in horizontal sheets, complicating any attempt at coordinated action by the remaining poachers. Their lights moved with increasing uncertainty, suggesting they were losing confidence in their operation. The cub, still safely protected in its corner, watched these developments with remarkable composure. Its behavior continued to show the results of extraordinary social learning. Even in this tense situation, it followed the example of focused calm shown by the adults. Marcus's satellite phone suddenly buzzed. The storm's pattern had shifted, enough to allow a weak signal. Moving carefully to maintain cover, he reached for the device. The matriarch watched his movement with understanding, adjusting her position to better shield him from outside view. He managed to send another brief message, this time receiving confirmation of receipt. Help was coming, if they could hold out long enough. The bears seemed to sense this development, their postures showing subtle shifts that suggested increased confidence. The radio scanner captured the poachers' growing uncertainty. Situation compromised, unknown defensive capabilities. Recommend immediate withdrawal. Their professional discipline was cracking in the face of this unprecedented resistance. The bears' response to these transmissions continued to amaze Marcus. They adjusted their positions based on the poachers' communications, anticipating potential moves and countering them before they could develop. Their strategic thinking went far beyond instinctive behavior. A sudden movement outside drew everyone's attention. The poachers' vehicles had started up, their engines growling against the storm's howl. Through his night vision scope, Marcus could see figures rushing back through the snow, abandoning their captured companions in their haste to retreat. The matriarch watched this development with evident satisfaction, though she maintained her alert posture. She made a series of soft sounds that resulted in subtle adjustments to the bears' defensive positions. They weren't relaxing their guard just because some of the threat had withdrawn. The captured poachers slumped slightly, realizing they had been abandoned by their team. The bears, keeping watch over them, remained focused and disciplined, their massive presence ensuring compliance without need for aggressive action. Marcus kept his attention divided between the windows and his captives, aware that the situation remained dangerous despite the poachers' partial retreat. The bears maintained their coordinated defense, their movements suggesting they shared his assessment of continuing risk. The storm's fury provided cover for the poachers' vehicles as they withdrew, their headlights disappearing into the swirling snow. But neither Marcus nor his ursine companions relaxed their vigilance. Professional operators like these might fake a retreat to lower their target's guard. The matriarch confirmed this concern with subtle signals to her family group. The bears adjusted their positions again, maintaining full defensive coverage while conserving energy for potential future action. Their tactical thinking continued to demonstrate remarkable sophistication. Through the long hours that followed, Marcus Thorne and his 13 bear companions held their sanctuary secure. The captured poachers remained under close guard while the bears' coordinated surveillance protected against any attempt at rescue or renewed attack. The storm raged on outside, but inside the cabin, an extraordinary partnership had proven its strength. Human and bears, working in intelligent cooperation, had defeated a sophisticated threat to their wilderness home. The implications of their success went far beyond this single night. They had demonstrated capabilities that would challenge scientific understanding of both species' potential for cross-species cooperation. The matriarch's quiet confidence never wavered as they maintained their vigil. In her eyes, Marcus saw not just intelligence, but vindication of her choice to trust a human with her family's safety. Together, they had proven that the boundaries between species were far more flexible than anyone had imagined. The first light of dawn brought not just illumination, but vindication of their long defense. Through the still swirling snow, Marcus could see the flashing lights of preserve ranger vehicles approaching. The bears watched these new arrivals with alert interest, but no alarm. They seemed to sense these humans were allies rather than threats. The matriarch stood by Marcus's side as rangers secured the area, their movements careful and professional as they took custody of the captured poachers. The bears' presence in the cabin drew astonished stares, but the rangers, experienced in wildlife behavior, quickly recognized the extraordinary nature of the situation. Dr. Thorne, the lead ranger, Jim Hawkins, addressed Marcus while trying to maintain his professional composure despite the unprecedented scene. "When we received your message about poachers, we didn't expect this." He gestured at the gathered bears, who watched the proceedings with remarkable calm. The captured poachers were led away, their expressions still showing disbelief at what they had encountered. Their equipment was catalogued and collected as evidence. Professional-grade gear that would help build a case against the larger trafficking operation. The matriarch made a soft sound that drew immediate attention from her family group. The bears adjusted their positions, maintaining their protective formation, but adapting to the presence of these new humans. Their behavior continued to demonstrate remarkable judgment and intelligence. "What we've witnessed here," Marcus explained to Hawkins, "goes beyond anything documented in wildlife research. These bears didn't just seek shelter. They organized, coordinated, and worked with human assistance to protect themselves and others." He gestured toward his research station, where maps and notes documented the extraordinary events. The cub, still maintaining its remarkable discipline, watched the rangers with evident curiosity. Its behavior showed none of the fear typically associated with bear cubs encountering humans. Instead, it seemed to be learning from this new situation, following the example of trust shown by the adults. As the morning progressed, more preserve officials arrived, drawn by reports of the unprecedented situation. Marcus found himself explaining again and again what had transpired, while the bears maintained their calm presence, supporting his account with their continued extraordinary behavior. "The implications of this are enormous," one wildlife biologist commented, watching as the bears coordinated their movements around the cabin. "This level of social cooperation, the ability to work with humans, it challenges everything we thought we knew about bear intelligence." The matriarch seemed to understand she was being discussed. She moved with deliberate grace, demonstrating the intelligence that had guided their successful defense. The other bears followed her lead, their behavior showing clear evidence of social structure and coordinated decision-making. Marcus's research notes, hastily recorded during the long night, would provide valuable documentation of their unprecedented alliance. But he knew the real impact of these events went beyond scientific documentation. They had demonstrated the potential for understanding between species that most would have thought impossible. The storm began to ease as the morning wore on, its fury spent in the night's drama. Sunlight broke through the clouds, illuminating the transformation that had occurred in this remote cabin. What had begun as a simple act of compassion, helping an injured bear, had evolved into something that would challenge scientific understanding and human assumptions about wildlife. The ranger's investigation revealed the full scope of the poaching operation. Maps and equipment recovered from the abandoned vehicles showed they had been systematically targeting bear dens throughout the preserve. The intelligence and coordination shown by the bears in response to this threat suggested they had understood far more about the danger than anyone had suspected. The matriarch watched these developments with evident interest, her presence beside Marcus a continuing testament to the trust that had developed between them. When preserve officials discussed relocating the bears, she made her position clear with subtle but unmistakable signals. Her family group would leave on their own terms when they were ready. "We've never seen anything like this," Hawkins admitted, watching as the bears maintained their organized presence in the cabin. "It's like they understand everything that's happening. They're not just tolerating human presence. They're actively participating in the situation." Marcus nodded, feeling both proud and humbled by what they had accomplished together. They sought help when they needed it, trusted when trust was warranted, and demonstrated capabilities far beyond what we've given them credit for. They're not just intelligent. They're capable of reasoning, planning, and cooperation across species boundaries. The cub had begun moving more freely around the cabin, though always under the watchful eyes of its protectors. Its interaction with the human visitors showed remarkable discrimination. It seemed to recognize those who meant no harm while maintaining cautious distance from unfamiliar equipment or sudden movements. As the day progressed, preserve officials documented everything: the bears' behavior, their coordinated movements, their clear social structure. What had happened in this cabin would become more than just an incident report. It would challenge fundamental assumptions about wildlife intelligence and human-animal relationships. The matriarch's leadership remained evident in every aspect of the bear's behavior. She maintained her position near Marcus, a living symbol of the bridge that had formed between their species. Her family group responded to her subtle signals, their movements showing both intelligence and purpose. "What happens now?" one of the rangers asked, watching as the bears continued their organized occupation of the cabin. The question seemed to hang in the air, weighted with implications that went far beyond the immediate situation. Marcus looked at the matriarch, seeing in her eyes the same question. They had succeeded in their immediate goal, defending against the poachers, protecting the family group. But the implications of their partnership would ripple far beyond this single night. "They'll return to the wild when they're ready," he answered finally. "But what we've learned from them, about their intelligence, their capacity for trust and cooperation, that changes everything. We can't go back to thinking of them as just animals acting on instinct." The matriarch made a soft sound that seemed to affirm his words. The other bears responded with their own quiet vocalizations, creating a harmony that filled the cabin. It was communication, Marcus realized, but on a level that human science was only beginning to understand. As the sun climbed higher, signs of the bears' eventual departure began to appear. They moved with increasing purpose, gathering near the doors and windows, sensing the changing weather and the call of their wilderness home. But there was no urgency in their movements. They would leave as they had arrived, on their own terms. The cub approached Marcus one last time, its trust in him now complete and unquestioning. He crouched down, honored by this final interaction, with a creature that represented the future of its species. In its eyes, he saw intelligence and potential that would shape new understanding of human-wildlife relationships. The matriarch supervised this farewell, her presence embodying the extraordinary partnership that had developed between them. She had chosen to trust a human when her family needed help, had worked with him to defend against those who would harm them. Her decision had led to a demonstration of bear intelligence and capability that would challenge scientific understanding for years to come. "Thank you," Marcus said softly, though the words seemed inadequate for what they had shared. The matriarch met his gaze with those intelligent eyes, and he knew she understood. Their partnership had transcended the usual boundaries between species, creating something unprecedented and profound. The bears began their departure with the same coordinated grace they had shown throughout their stay. They moved in groups, maintaining their protective formation around the cub, but now their movements had a different purpose, returning to their wilderness home. Marcus and the preserve officials watched as the bears disappeared into the forest, their dark shapes merging with the shadows between the trees. The matriarch was the last to leave, pausing at the forest's edge to look back at the cabin that had served as their sanctuary. In that final glance, Marcus saw all they had accomplished together. The trust built, the boundaries crossed, the assumptions challenged. What had happened in his remote cabin would change not just scientific understanding of bears, but human perspectives on the potential for connection between species. The story of the frozen bear who begged to enter his house had become something far more significant, a testament to the extraordinary capabilities of these magnificent creatures, and a challenge to human assumptions about the limits of animal intelligence and cross-species cooperation. As the bears vanished into their wilderness home, Marcus knew their legacy would live on in changed understanding and perspective. They had shown that when trust transcends fear, when intelligence is recognized across species boundaries, extraordinary partnerships become possible. The matriarch's last rumbling call echoed through the trees, not a farewell, but a reminder. They had shared something profound, human, and bears united in defense of their wilderness home. That connection would endure, challenging scientific understanding and human assumptions about the possibilities for trust and cooperation between species. If this story touched your heart, like and share it with others who believe in the extraordinary potential for understanding between humans and wildlife. Remember to subscribe for more tales that challenge our assumptions and celebrate the remarkable intelligence and capability of the creatures with whom we share our world. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.